My brother said with a sneering smile, "Yes, our father loved me as his own, even though I was not related by blood because I was my mother's child from a previous relationship. He would definitely be happier if his son inherited it instead of some woman who isn't related by blood. You're not my sister anymore. I'm cutting ties with you. Own daughter, which is why I found him so remarkable." My brother's desire to seize everything our father left me infuriated me, but I was reassured by his statement that I would cut all ties with him in exchange. "Once you inherit, don't ever get in touch with me again, as I would never do that, and don't expect any money from me later. Not even a penny. My name is Kelly, and I'm a 29-year-old civil servant. My 22-year-old brother Steve, who recently received his degree from college, frequently boasts that his business is more well-known and prosperous than the little city office where I work. I suppose this is because I had a father who worked for a large organization in my blood. Steve frequently raises the issue of acquiring our father's characteristics. Despite having the same mother, our fathers are different. Although I am technically a stepchild, my father never hated me for it and always loved me. I don't really remember my biological father much because he fled with his affair partner when I was a kid, and Steve is the child of our current parents. Steve never mentioned that I was a stepchild or that we had a different father when he was younger, so I consider my current dad to be my biological father. However, when I was an adult and he was still in middle school, our mother passed away in a car accident, and unable to deal with it without placing the blame elsewhere, Steve persuaded himself that it was my fault. At the funeral, he complained, "Why did Mom have to die? It would have been better if it were you." No matter how shocked he was, hearing such things made me lose all affection for my brother. I wanted to respond angrily to such a harsh statement, but our father, who I had never seen so furious, reprimanded Steve severely, so I decided to keep quiet, of course, but my relationship with Steve soared at first. He attempted to outshine me academically, but his goals were too lofty, and he was unable to gain admission to his top high school and university choices. He was also unable to outpeer me because I was a full-time employee and he was only a student and part-time worker. He could have competed in many other areas, such as sports or the arts, but he stopped accepting challenges out of fear of failing because he believed he could dominate by poking at the fact that we were blood relatives without having to put in any effort. Eventually, Steve simply continued to make fun of me for being a stepchild rather than our father's biological child. Was most likely simply misplaced. He was initially upset about losing our mother, but as he grew older, he truly began to think that Dad and I were the real family and that the sister was an outsider because I was a stepchild and I was more important than her. I got sick of having to put up with such a self-centered brother who would cause himself to lose by his own means. When Steve decided to commute to university from home, I moved out to live alone in a flat and became so tired of dealing with him that I began to disregard him carelessly. When I returned home, I made sure to arrange with Dad to visit when Steve wasn't there. 4 years later, Steve graduated from university and was able to find employment at a rather well-known local businesses. Since I have a father who works for a large corporation and his character hasn't changed even after 4 years of university, I decided not to give him the tie I had prepared as a graduation gift. Of course, I got a job at a much better and more renowned company than the city office where you work as a civil servant. The present, that lifestyle didn't last even a year before Dad suddenly fell ill. There were no signs when we spoke on the phone the night before he passed away, so abruptly that I didn't even have time to say goodbye at the funeral. I served as a carer for him. I continued to live alone and commute to work while he lived with our father and faced the harsh waves of society as a new working adult. The inheritance was the issue. Steve and I were the only living inheritors. The major mourner, and thanks to Dad's earlier arrangements regarding what was needed and which processes to follow. Everything else went well. I discovered some papers regarding the inheritance in my father's chamber, but I had a hunch that talking about it would unavoidably cause friction. Steve showed up for our meeting more than 30 minutes late without saying sorry and said something ridiculous right away, knowing full well that it wouldn't be followed. The legacy: I'll take everything since I'm the biological child, and you're simply an outsider as a stepchild. Isn't it selfish of you? To assert one's inheritance, Steve kept giggling about controlling the inheritance and being the true child. I committed to renounce the inheritance because I was so sick of putting up with him all my life. You must never get in touch with me since I won't get anything from Dad in exchange. No matter what, you are so foolish that I would never get in touch with you again. Don't expect anything from me. Just go away, disgusted. Steve continued to smirk as I got up to leave, remembering how adorable he was as a kid. The following day, I went to a law office to handle the legal elements of the refusing to inherit Kelly. You said that since you are your father's stepchild, you have no inheritance rights. However, since my father once adopted me, I do have the right to inherit his stuff, but I will renounce it since I no longer want anything. The lettucey stopped the lawyer, and he acknowledged me, but I hadn't told Steve about it because my father had legally adopted me after he married my mother, so even though we weren't biological, we were really parents and children. I knew about everything Dad owned from the estate investigation, but I wanted to avoid the hassles of being referred to as a stepchild or a biological child, so I had decided to give up. A month later, the lawyer told me that the family court had accepted my renunciation of the inheritance. I contacted Steve and said, "Hello, my renunciation of the inheritance is complete." Dad had interrupted me, saying, "Shut up," because he had learned from the estate investigation that you've renounced. Knowing that Steve would eventually come crying made me feel even worse. The inheritance hung up and said, "Stop acting like a real sister and don't ever contact me again." After 3 months, I began getting a lot of calls and emails from Steve, so I hesitantly answered when I heard his worn-out voice. What I need in order to borrow money, Dad owed money, and I'm unable to make the payments. I do use my dad's funds, but it wasn't enough. My response shouldn't have been so negative if you used all the savings. He had debt to pay back. Steve screamed back, "Did you push the debt on me, knowing all about this? Since you're only a stepchild, you must be jealous of me, the real child, who hung up the phone when I tried to tell you who had blocked my calls. I thought I would email you out of sympathy, but you unblocked me when you got into trouble. Who is the one with the bad personality here?" I had heard about Dad's financial situation, circumstances, including his large debts, as part of my renunciation process managed by the lawyer. I intended to tell Steve, but he cut off all communication, so I left it at that. Naturally, he ended up approaching me in tears. Dad worked for a large corporation, but you can only imagine how difficult it was to send you to high school and college. There was educational insurance, and, since I'm not your sister, talk to the mortgage lender or lawyer. What are you talking about? Plus, I'm treating you like a sister even though you're only a child. Mom's life insurance, but things like the house and car had to be paid with loans. Be pleased about it, stepchild. Come on, Kelly, give me some money. I'm frustrated at his arrogant tone. I hung up abruptly and blocked Steve's number because he didn't know where I lived alone, and I hadn't left any traces of my house at his. I even bought a new cell phone in the hopes that it would stop him from calling, but I was mistaken. Please, Kelly, I need money. Without it, I couldn't make it. Unlike when he used to act haughtily towards me, Steve began to show up at the city office where I work. He only came during lunch breaks, which seemed to suggest he was slipping out of work, but on the days he didn't visit, he would still phone, repeatedly interfering with my work. I told my boss about it, and they put me in an administrative role. However, he started staying after work and wouldn't leave until he saw me. I caught him waiting for me and dragged him to the parking lot. Stop it already. Don't cause any trouble at my workplace. I told you to check with the loan. I already spoke with the institutions and the lawyer, and when he finally stopped trying to be courteous, he looked down at me with his arms crossed in a fury. All right, the insurance from the group credit life policy means I don't have to pay for the house anymore, and the car's left me with roughly $5,000, so I worked out a lower monthly payment and continued to use it. When I pressed him further, he reluctantly started talking. Dad had a lot of savings, so I spent it on different things and went over budget. I borrowed money from a friend, but now I can't pay it back. You're not really struggling to live, Dad. You only had those 2 loans. What are you begging for money for? His anger suddenly subsided, and he looked around anxiously. That guy is claiming that I defrauded him, so I can't borrow from anyone else anymore. If I can't borrow from friends, I'll have to turn to predatory lenders, and I'll have to pay back the money I borrowed. His story was complicated, but I could understand the mess he was in. You even keep taking out loans to pay back loans, and now you're stuck. That's it. I believe I'm already on the blacklist or something, so I can't borrow money any longer. If you pay, everything will be resolved. When I slapped his hand away, Steve rubbed it and gave me a furious look. There's no way I'm paying it, he shouted, reaching out for me to ask Kelly to give me $88,000. You were solely to blame for your excessive purchasing and use of loan sharks. Why are you unable to assist me when I ask questions such as, is it because we are only half-blood related that you don't care about your brother? Your stepchildren are the worst. Steve tried to hold on to me as I got into my car and turned on the engine, which was really painful. You offered to never contact me again in exchange for the inheritance, but you beg for money, are rude, and stupid. I don't have a single penny for you, and if you come again, I'll call the police. I knocked his hand away out of desperation. Steve yelled out to me several times. Kelly, but I chose to ignore him. Steve continued to visit the city hall until closing time, bothering people from different departments with his calls in the morning and evening. As a result, he became one of the most troublesome people there for as long as I was there. I then stepped on the accelerator, leaving him in the parking lot, and drove away. I was present. It was simpler for me to go because he was a bother because he didn't yell or make a commotion at the counter, making it hard to report him. Do you want what caused Kelly to leave this municipal hall? And how much severance PIP did she receive? Steve arrived at the counter as usual, and he was informed by the employees that I had resigned and received severance pay, so he began desperately searching for me, but since staff members' addresses and phone numbers are secured, he was unable to reach me without permission. Steve was occasionally reported as a suspicious individual due to his unusual wanderings. According to a child Steve had defaulted on, he is now repaying little by little each month with significant late fees added because he was unable to collect the money by the repayment deadline. It appears that he is ultimately facing wage garnishment because he is now compelled to live modestly very different from as for me. I didn't really leave the city hall because the city where I work was created by combining multiple towns, so the old town hall still serves as a branch office. I told the personnel department about the situation and was moved to a branch in the mountains until things improved. When I first settled down, I intended to go back to my old department after my brother's problem was resolved, but now I find that working in this branch is more fulfilling. The mountain area has fewer residents and is always understaffed, so I feel that I am more helpful to the residents here when I say that I have no family left. Everyone treats me with kindness, which makes me sad. Although losing both of my parents never completely goes away, I am at least grateful to be free of the hassles of being classified as a stepchild or a biological kid.